In 2001, the Western world was rocked by the September 11th terrorist attacks in New York City, which led to the deaths of almost 3,000 people, the collapse of the Twin Towers, and saw the US government initiate its global war on terrorism program, where it launched attacks against both al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. Though we are all familiar with the tragic events of 9/11, we are less so with the specific names and faces behind them. 33-year-old Egyptian-born Mohamed Atta has been described by the media as the ringleader of the attack and was the pilot of American Airlines Flight 11. Born into a comfortable middle-class lifestyle and surrounded by successful family members, including lawyers and doctors, he plunged into religious extremism after arriving in Germany for his postgraduate education, and eventually made his way into the grasp of al-Qaeda. Join us for this documentary as we examine the case of Mohamed Atta, al-Qaeda's 9/11 ringleader. Mohamed Atta was born on September 1st, 1968 in Kafr el-Sheikh, a governorate of Egypt located in the Nile Delta region. He was the only son born to his parents. He had two older sisters who were both highly educated, driven, and successful. One sister trained as a doctor, while the other became a zoology professor. Atta's father, Mohamed al-Amir Atta, was a lawyer educated in both civil and Sharia law, while his mother, Buthania Muhammad Mustafa Shiraki, had been born to a wealthy farming and trading family. She was well educated and had married Atta's father when she was just 14 as part of an arranged marriage between the two families. By all accounts, the Atta family were rather insular and isolated. They had little extended family on Mohammed Sr.'s side, and rarely communicated with Buthania's relatives. In-laws described Mohammed Sr. as austere, strict, and private, while neighbours viewed the family as reclusive. As a child, Atta's father recalled that he enjoyed playing chess and never grew to enjoy video games. When he was 10, the family uprooted to Cairo, Egypt's capital city, settling in the neighbourhood of Abdeen, close to the centre. Adding to the family's insular nature, Mohammed Sr. forbade his son from associating with the neighbourhood children, leaving the young boy with a lot of free time, which he used to study. He soon outperformed his classmates and became a star pupil, though his peers were less than impressed with his cleverness and generally regarded him as a loner due to his father's strict rules about fraternising. In 1985, he enrolled in an engineering program at Cairo University. A surprise to no one, he excelled at his studies and was among the highest scoring students in his year. By his senior year, he was brought in to join an exclusive architecture program, and in 1990, he graduated with a degree in architecture. He subsequently joined the Engineers Syndicate, which reportedly has ties to the Sunni Islamist organisation, the Muslim Brotherhood, and worked for several months at the Urban Development Centre in Cairo. Also in 1990, his family relocated to Giza. Those who knew Atta observed that he felt great pressure to academically succeed and maintain his rank on the social class ladder, something which became all the more worrisome to him when he failed to graduate with enough marks that would allow him to enter into postgraduate education. Ahmed Khalifa noted that his friend was frustrated that he was unable to fulfill his academic ambitions in Egypt and believed that political favoritism in the country prevented him from earning the top spots. Atta was never seen as a particularly political person in his youth, as it was difficult to avoid conversations that revolved around politics and religion in Egypt. classmates recalled that he often offered run-of-the-mill responses when asked for his opinions. Nobody ever remembered seeing him pray, and several people who held conversations with him observed that he had a strong take when the topic of Islamic terrorists came up. He described them as brainless, irresponsible people. Later, post 9/11, many of his former classmates struggled to reconcile the version of Atta they were familiar with and the one who had carried out the suicide attacks that day in 2001. Ahmed Khalifa, who became close friends with Atta during his time at Cairo University, told Time, "I could never imagine him on a plane threatening people, killing people. He would be scared to death. He was not a leader. He had his opinion, but he was modest in everything. His emotions were steady, and he was not easily influenced or swayed. Mohammed was well liked because he never offended or bothered anyone." Another old classmate added, "He was good to the roots." One peer, Khalid Katan, remembered that Atta was highly sensitive and became incensed by injustice. He reportedly couldn't tolerate death in any manner. Even the killing of an insect was enough to upset him. Khalid stated, "He was a little bit pure. If he thought that I said or did something wrong, then he would say that in front of anybody." Following the revelation that Atta could not enter into a postgraduate education in Egypt, his father encouraged him to study abroad, so he entered into a German language program at the Goethe Institute in Cairo. In 1992, his father learned of a German couple who were visiting the city who ran an exchange program, and after speaking with them, they extended an invitation to Atta to continue with his studies in Germany. They were even able to set him up with room and board. Atta accepted the invitation and arrived in Germany in July of 1992, several weeks after the arrangements were made. In Germany, he began studying urban planning at the Hamburg University of Technology, and it was here that things began to take a turn. Atta first lived with two high school teachers, but the trio quickly struggled to cohabit peacefully as the teachers found his closed-mindedness and extremely introverted personality to be too difficult for them to deal with. During his time in Hamburg, his personality shifted drastically. He started to adhere to the strictest Islamic diet, frequented the Al-Quds Mosque, which adhered to a fundamentalist and militant version of Sunni Islam, barely socialized, and often showed contempt towards the couple's daughter, who was unmarried with a child of her own. After 6 months of living with the couple, Atta was asked to leave. Atta was able to make a few friends during his time at Hamburg University of Technology, including Volker Horth, whom he'd met in 1993. The two often travelled together and studied with one another, and Horth would later report that while he liked Atta, he had a sense of rigidity about him. He recalled, "I knew Mohammed as a guy searching for justice. He felt offended by this broad wrong direction the world was taking." After leaving the home he shared with the two high school teachers, Atta moved into university housing and shared a residence with two other students. He remained there between 1993 and 1998, with his roommates later observing that they found his behaviour off-putting and unnecessarily difficult, noting that they particularly disliked his complete, almost aggressive insularity, keeping to himself to such an extreme degree that he would often ignore simple hellos and goodbyes. In 1996, Atta signed his last will and testament at the Al-Quds Mosque, the same one he'd been attending throughout his time in Germany, declaring his Muslim beliefs and giving 18 instructions regarding his burial. Such instructions reflected those of Sunni funeral rites as well as those of Salafism, including asking people not to show emotion during the event. Over the years, Atta made acquaintances with other regular attendees of the mosque and even started teaching classes at both Al-Quds and another Turkish mosque near the Hamburg district. On top of this, he established and led a prayer group where he met several al-Qaeda members, including Ramzi bin al-Shib, a Yemeni national who's believed to have been al-Qaeda's communications officer and has been detained by the US government at Guantanamo Bay since 2006. During the mid-1990s, Atta began missing classes and disappearing from school for extended periods. He reportedly told his thesis advisor that he was going to Syria to work on his thesis. The piece would be specifically about the city of Aleppo, and he researched the history of the urban landscape in relation to the conflict between Arab and modern civilization. He was particularly critical of how skyscrapers and other modern projects harmed communities, disrupting, blocking streets, and altering the skyline. Additionally, he spent months away from his job in Hamburg in 1995, telling his employers that he was going on a pilgrimage to Mecca. Similar to how his friends back in Cairo knew him, his colleagues at the job reported that he did not seem very politically involved, recalling that he regularly condemned terrorist attacks on tourists in Egypt. They did, however, also note that he disliked Western influence. In particular, as an architectural student, he was known to have complained about the rising popularity of skyscrapers in Arab cities. He described his family's new apartment in Giza as a shabby symbol of Egypt's haphazard attempts to modernize and its shameless embrace of the West. Atta's peers reported that on his return to university, he was sporting a large bushy beard with his upper lip bare, a look often favoured by committed fundamentalists. They also noted that he was much more serious now. Volker Horth, one of Atta's closest friends in Germany, had left school in 1995 and had fallen out of touch with the Egyptian native. He recalled that he had been able to laugh at jokes about Arab dictators when he knew him, but a young woman who became acquainted with Atta following his return to Germany stated that she couldn't even remember seeing him smile. Others reported that Atta returned to school with very strong opinions on particular subjects, such as the Gulf War and the Oslo Accords, part of a peace process and a pair of interim agreements between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization. He was also angry about the Egyptian government, which cracked down on the Muslim Brotherhood and the upper class in his homeland, who he believed hoarded power for themselves. He was particularly passionate about the wealth gap, observing the contrast between a few rich people and the mass of people with barely enough to survive. Additionally, Atta was anti-Semitic, blaming Jewish people for many of the world's woes, and even believed that Monica Lewinsky, most famous for her affair with US President Bill Clinton in the 1990s when she was just 22 years old, was a Jewish agent who influenced Clinton's decision not to aid Palestine during the ongoing conflict with Israel. Ahmed Khalifa, his best friend in Cairo, ran into Atta one day in the city in 1999. He remembered that Atta was depressed and bitter about not having a career or family in Egypt, stating, "I think he felt that he had just been studying all those years. When I said goodbye, I was sad." Notably, though he'd completed his studies in Germany and sought to return home, there was a lack of job prospects in Cairo, in part because his family lacked the connections necessary for him to secure a good position. As a result, his father wanted him to continue studying abroad, while his mother believed he should go along with those wishes. In 1998, Atta became ineligible for university housing in Germany, forcing him to find another residence. He, along with two other men, Ramzi bin al-Shib and Said Bahaji, an electrical engineer, moved into an apartment together in Hamburg, with Atta and bin al-Shib taking up work at a warehouse packing computers for shipping. The trio moved a short time later to the borough of Hamburg. German authorities believed that it was in 1999 that Atta became acquainted with a large number of individuals connected to terrorism, observing that he was associating with a Syrian businessman named Mamoun Darkazanli, who had power of attorney for a German bank account in the name of a man believed to be Osama bin Laden's finance chief, although the businessman denied any such links. In early 1999, he was permitted to establish an Islamic student group at school, which is where he is believed to have met several other extremists who participated in the 9/11 attack, including Marwan al-Shehi, who flew the second plane on 9/11 United Airlines Flight 175, and Ziad Jarrah, who piloted United Flight 93, which crashed in Pennsylvania. Atta's group consisted of around 40 members who prayed together every day. That same year, Atta visited Afghanistan, followed by Pakistan, in the company of bin al-Shib, al-Shehi, Jarrah, and Bahaji. Here, they were selected by al-Qaeda military chief Mohamed Atta to be part of the Plains operation plot. The group of young men were well educated, familiar with Western society, spoke some English, and would be able to obtain visas. They reportedly then met with bin Laden himself, who requested them to pledge their loyalty and participate in the suicide missions. They accepted, after which they were sent to speak with Atta again to become familiar with the plan. German investigators later revealed that Atta had trained at al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan between 1999 and 2000. Upon their return to Germany, several of the men claimed that they had lost their passports, likely to cover up evidence that they had been in Afghanistan, which may have jeopardized their chances of obtaining US visas. After receiving their new passports in the spring of 2000, Atta and al-Shehi flew to the US. In the following months, Atta returned to Europe, but then headed to the US again in June, arriving in Newark, New Jersey, with a 6-month tourist visa. A few weeks later, he and al-Shehi signed up for flight training at Huffman Aviation International in Venice, Florida, and began renting a property in nearby Nokomis. Their landlady described al-Shehi as likable, but observed that Atta was cold and standoffish, never looking her in the eye. The two men were reportedly keen students, paying together $40,000 for 4 months of flight training. The school's owner, Rudy Deckers, noted that Atta did not come across as pleasant and took an immediate dislike to him. When Atta once mentioned that he lived in Germany, Deckers took this as an opportunity to brush up on his German language skills, but Atta reportedly responded by turning away from him. Neither he nor Atta bothered to socialize with the other students, instead preferring to keep to themselves, and at one point their bad attitudes almost got them expelled from the school. As this would be a disaster for their terrorism scheme, they quickly softened their personalities in order to keep their places. Though Atta's visa expired on December 3, 2000, it was not noticed by the system, so he remained in the country. On December 21st, he and al-Shehi received their pilot's licenses. The following week, they trained for several hours each on the Boeing 727 simulator at Sim Center Incorporated at Opa-locka Airport near Miami, by which point they'd logged about 300 hours of flying time. Further preparation involved Atta and the other men purchasing global position devices from an aviation supply shop in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, tools used to help pilots navigate. In the summer of 2001, Atta spent a brief period of time in Spain, where he met with bin al-Shib for the final time. His flight from Miami was via Zurich, Switzerland, where he had a stopover. At this time, he withdrew about 1,700 francs from an ATM and then used his credit card to purchase 2 Swiss Army knives and some chocolate from a shop inside the airport. He arrived in Madrid, Spain, on July the 8th and spent several hours in the airport before checking into a nearby hotel at 8:50 that night. He called a liaison for bin al-Shib that night, as well as twice the following morning. Later that same morning, he rented a car and picked up bin al-Shib at the airport. Though they are known to have spent a night in Cambrils, their movements after that are unclear due to a lack of surveillance footage, credit card receipts, and other such evidence. It is believed that during this time, they resided in a safe house provided by other al-Qaeda operatives. During the meetings in Spain, bin al-Shib passed along instructions from bin Laden, who asked for the operation to be carried out as soon as possible. Atta reportedly replied that the hijackers had all made it to the US, but they still needed several weeks to plan and prepare. The hijackers were organized into 4 teams, each led by a pilot-trained individual who would pilot the flight to their designated target, while 3 or 4 muscle hijackers would be in charge of subduing the flight crew, pilots, and passengers. Each team was given a different target to attack. At these meetings, they established what targets should be struck. The idea of hitting a power plant was bandied about, but ultimately discarded. while bin Laden suggested via bin al-Shib that the US Capitol, the Pentagon, and the World Trade Center should be attacked, as he believed they were seen as symbols of America. He added that if they could not reach their targets, the hijackers should crash their planes. Atta was designated the ringleader over all 4 groups. Atta returned to the US on July 19, 2001, and in the following weeks, he spent time dropping off and picking up various al-Qaeda members who were part of the scheme and traveling to several other US cities, including Las Vegas and Wayne, New Jersey, on surveillance flights, where he took in final details and rehearsed how the terrorist attack would be carried out. He also met regularly with Nawaf al-Hazmi, who was part of the American Airlines Flight 77 hijacking crew, to keep him updated on their progress. On August 23rd, Atta's driving license was revoked in absentia after he failed to show up to court regarding a traffic citation in which he'd driven without a license. By this time, Atta and the other men had taken to drifting around various US cities, living in low-rent dwellings for a short time before moving on. They kept so much to themselves in order to avoid being caught that they stopped attending mosque. Notably, that same day, Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, listed him among one of 19 US residents who were believed to be planning an imminent attack on the US. This list was given to the CIA, and only 4 names have ever been publicly revealed, with all 4 being part of the 9/11 attacks. It is unknown if the 19 names on the list correlate directly to the 19 men who are ultimately found to be behind the 9/11 plot. On the morning of September 11th, Atta and one of his crew, Abdulaziz Al-Omari, arrived at Portland International Airport in Portland, Maine, having arrived from the state of Massachusetts the day before. Before the pair boarded a flight back to Boston, Atta was selected by the computer-assisted passenger pre-screening system to have his bags checked for explosives. Atta himself did not undergo extra screening. However, when they reached Terminal B for their flight, they were told of further security screening that would take place when they landed in Boston, something which angered Atta. Although the airport employee, Mike Tuahi, was concerned by his outburst, he didn't report it for fears that he was racially profiling the 33-year-old. After landing in Boston, Atta took a call from al-Shehi, which confirmed that everything and everyone was in place for the attacks to begin. Atta subsequently checked in for American Airlines Flight 11, which would be heading for Los Angeles National Airport, passed security with no problems and boarded the flight. The plane was carrying 81 passengers when it departed from Boston, as well as 11 crew members. At 8:14 a.m., around 15 minutes into the flight, the hijacking began. Pilots stopped checking in with air traffic control, which was the first cause of concern to those on the ground. Then the aircraft began to deviate from its scheduled route, and at 8:21 a.m., its transponder, which allowed the ATC to locate them, was turned off. Interestingly, the pilots of United Airlines Flight 175, which would be hijacked shortly afterwards by al-Shehi, noticed a suspicious transmission while leaving the runway around the same time as Flight 11. They had heard the words, "Everyone, stay in your seats." This transmission was never heard by the ATC, but it is believed likely that Atta was speaking while entering the cockpit. One flight attendant named Betty Ong was able to use her telephone card to call American Airlines Operations Center to alert them of the hijacking and report that no one could contact the men inside the cockpit or enter the area.
In the back, the cockpit's not answering. Somebody's stabbed in business class, and I think there's mates that we can't breathe. I don't know. I think we're getting hijacked. Which flight are you on? Flight 12.
She and another flight attendant, Madeleine Amy Sweeney, were able to give the center the seat numbers of the hijackers. At 8:24 a.m., Atta told the ATC,
"Is that American 11 trying to call?"
Buddy, we have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're heading to the airport.
He'd attempted to make this announcement to the passengers and crew through the aircraft's PA system, but had pressed the wrong switch, alerting air traffic control to the hijacking. He then stated,
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll injure yourself and the airplane. Let's stay quiet.
He subsequently turned the plane southbound in the direction of New York City. At 8:33 a.m., he transmitted,
Nobody move, please. We are going back to the airport. Don't try to make any stupid moves.
This was the last message transmitted from Flight 11. Just 12 minutes later, at 8:46 a.m., Flight 11 collided with the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City, between floors 93 and 99. Both Atta and everybody else on board were killed during the impact, while hundreds of civilians inside the building perished instantly. Over 800 survivors were stranded on the upper floors because the crash had severed the escape routes from floor 92 and above, and the impact had prompted a fire to break out. None of these individuals was able to make it out alive before the tower collapsed 102 minutes later at 10:28 a.m, with some having thrown themselves from the building rather than face the blaze. United Airlines Flight 175, piloted by al-Shehi, the youngest pilot at age 23 and carrying 56 passengers and a crew of 9, struck the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. The third plane, American Airlines Flight 77, heading for LA with 58 passengers and a crew of 6, took off from Dulles Airport near Washington, D.C., and struck the southwest side of the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m, causing a fire to start. While 22 minutes later, the South Tower collapsed in New York. Meanwhile, earlier that morning at 8:42 a.m, United Airlines Flight 93 left Newark, New Jersey for San Francisco, carrying 37 passengers and 7 crew members. However, due to a delay in the plane departing, as well as a setback in beginning the hijacking process, when the assault began, passengers and crew members had already learned of the Twin Towers attack and decided to fight back in order to regain control of the aircraft. Ziad Jarrah, the hijacker pilot, was unable to make it to the Capitol building as planned due to the ensuing struggle, and ultimately crashed the plane into a field in Stony Creek Township near Indian Lake and Shanksville, Pennsylvania at 10:03 a.m. The resulting impact of these attacks was devastating, particularly that of the Twin Towers in New York City. Civilians reported running in panic from the smoke and debris that was a consequence of the assaults, while numerous buildings nearby suffered serious damage, and some even collapsed. Fires at the site continued to smoulder for over 3 months. Almost 3,000 people died as a result of the 9/11 plot, with the vast majority of deaths occurring in New York, where around 2,750 fatalities were recorded, including around 400 police officers and firefighters who responded to the scene. A further 184 people perished at the Pentagon, and 40 in Pennsylvania. Thousands more were injured, while all 19 of the al-Qaeda attackers met their demise in these suicide missions. Hundreds of thousands of people had watched the collapse of the towers in real time, recording and photographing the devastation at the heart of New York City, while millions watched these horrors unfold on live television. For several days, commercial aviation came to a halt in the US, leaving many stranded, with normal service returning on September 13th, now with more stringent security measures in place. As well as strengthening such procedures at airports, they were also improved at large venues, sports stadiums, and government buildings. Congress passed the US Patriot Act of 2001, which allowed the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to have extended search and surveillance powers, while the Department of Homeland Security was established following the 2002 Homeland Security Act. Al-Qaeda soon became a very familiar name in households, not just across America, but in much of the rest of the world. The terrorist group was once an unknown entity, but was now not only famous for the attacks, but had also become a massive target for the US government, which launched its global war on terrorism campaign the following month, with an invasion of Afghanistan beginning on October 7th, 2001. Within months, thousands of militants were killed or captured, while high-ranking leaders of the group were forced into hiding. While al-Qaeda is credited with causing chaos, death and destruction, 9/11 led to similar circumstances on their side, and also caused them to lose their main headquarters in Afghanistan. Additionally, al-Qaeda leaders did not account for an American invasion of the country and failed to adequately prepare for retaliation. Notably, Mohamed Atta's luggage had not made it on board Flight 11, and his bags were later recovered at Logan International Airport in Boston. His bags contained airline uniforms, flight manuals, and a copy of his will, written in Arabic, as well as a list of instructions titled The Last Night. It detailed tasks to be carried out the night before 9/11, the journey to board the plane in Boston, and the time between boarding the plane and the suicide attack. When news reached Atta's father that the 33-year-old had been involved in the terror attack, he vehemently denied it, accusing both Mossad and the US government of framing him. He described his son as being a quiet boy, uninvolved in politics, noting that he was shy and devoted to his studies. He added, "He is a moderate in his adherence to his faith, like me and his mother." At one point, he claimed that he'd spoken with Atta over the phone on September the 12th, and that his son had told him that he was alive but hiding, fearing for his life. He claimed that American Christians were responsible for 9/11. Several weeks later, on September 24th, he told an interviewer, "My son is gone. He is now with God. The Mossad killed him." He later labelled the US the root of terrorism and blamed Israel for 9/11. Reportedly, as recently as 2021, members of the family are still in denial. Atta's mother was interviewed by a Spanish news outlet that year, where she denied that her son was involved in the terrorist plot and stated her belief that he was somewhere in Afghanistan. His father wasn't the only one in denial, however. His few friends in Egypt were also shocked by the news that Atta had participated in the assault, with a former classmate stating, "To fly a plane, what a joke. Mohammed could hardly ride a bike." Another who knew him at university added, "He came from an average middle-class background. Mohammed no way could have done that." However, Hala Mustafa, an authority on militant groups at the Al-Aram Center for Political and Strategic Studies in Cairo, observed, "Just because you are educated and travel does not mean that you cannot join a militant organization. Terrorists should be illiterate or primitive? Not so." Over the years, several experts have attempted to characterize Atta and discern the real motivations behind his actions. Gerald Post, a psychiatrist who spent time working for the CIA, suggested that all 19 men involved were simply following orders from al-Qaeda's leaders, but they believed that everything that was asked of them was the correct thing to do in order to further their cause. Meanwhile, political scientist Robert Pape believes that Atta was driven by his commitment to the cause. He noted that the 33-year-old seemed to be psychologically normal and that he was not readily characterized as depressed, not unable to enjoy life, not detached from friends and society. Criminal justice professor Adam Langford, however, disagrees, observing evidence that Atta was depressed, socially isolated and suicidal. He believed he was suffering from unexplored and likely repressed feelings of anger, shame, guilt and hopelessness, which is very common not just in those who die by suicide, but also those who carry out murder-suicide. Langford proposed that Atta's belief system only affected his choice of method and target, but did not influence his death itself. Langford also disagrees with Post's conclusion that they were blindly following orders. He pointed out that Atta disagreed with bin Laden on 2 points. The first was that bin Laden wished to attack the White House, but Atta insisted that the Capitol building was the better target. The second was that bin Laden wanted the attacks to take place in July, but Atta wanted to wait several months. Langford stated, "This suggests that Atta had his own agenda. Like many people who commit murder-suicide, he wanted to kill and be killed, but he wanted to do it on his own timeline." He believes that the final straw for Atta was that he wished to return home and settle in Egypt. However, his mother told him that he should follow his father's wishes and go and study in America. Langford observed that he likely felt rejected once again, this time by the one person in the world that he's close to, referring to Atta's mother. Langford has studied the other 3 pilots involved in the attacks and reached similar conclusions about them. He suggested that al-Shehi was struggling to cope with his father's death 3 years earlier, and that Hani Hanjour, the pilot of Flight 77, was deeply insecure, a loner with few friends and a deliberating shyness. Langford noted that he had aspired to become a flight attendant, but his brother had made fun of him and urged him to become a pilot instead. Though he obtained his license, he struggled to get work, leading him, in his anger, to make connections with al-Qaeda members. Ziad Jarrah, meanwhile, the pilot of Flight 93, was quoted as being dissatisfied with life and not wanting to leave Earth in a natural way. He was reportedly prone to mood swings and had an unstable relationship with his girlfriend, who'd attempted suicide before. Langford noted that carrying out mass murder allowed these men to claim a purpose ostensibly more glorious than simply killing themselves, and added, the desire to acquire fame and glory through killing and then escape the consequences is a critical similarity between certain suicide bombers, rampage shooters, and school shooters. He concluded that although many of these men tried to portray themselves and their deaths as noble and for a cause they truly believe in, because such suicide attackers are often celebrated for their martyrdom, many are instead engaging in a quest for personal significance.